Well, welcome to Reverend Dr. Anna Robbins, President of Acadia Divinity College, Dean of Theology for Acadia University. Anna, I'm thrilled to be able to interview you today on behalf of the Aaron Ministries Network. And for those of you who haven't met me, my name is Harry Gardner. I'm serving as chair of the communications team. Anna, the Aaron Ministries Network is about equipping people to serve. It's about encouraging pastors, Christian leaders to be healthy in every way. Concept of also, as part of our goal, is the healthy churches impacting communities. But before I get into all of that, because I know that that's very much a part of your heart as well, tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of your roots and coming to faith and just your journey to Acadia.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm a Maritimer by birth, born and raised in St. John, New Brunswick. Came to faith in St. John, outreach from the local Baptist church in St. John, who had a ministry into the neighborhood, the inner city neighborhood where I lived. And thanks to the passion some of those folks had to reach the neighborhood for Jesus, I was a product of that. So came to faith young, grew up in the church, very involved as I grew, and I learned lots of leadership skills in the context of the church. Was allowed to have a lot of responsibility from a young age, which trains you quickly, which is good. But when I graduated high school, I was 16 and wanted to go to Ottawa, so that's what I did. Went to Carleton.
You graduated at 16. That's not often the case.
I liked school and finished it quickly, but went to Carleton first to study journalism and then switched to political science because that really seemed to capture my interest while I was there. Met a young man named Peter, and when we finished our studies, returned to St. John, and he was baptized, we were married, and got really immersed in the ministries of the church where I had grown up. Well, I was also working for the Red Cross at the time. It was about a year later we found ourselves here at Acadia preparing for ministry, and served in ministry down the valley, but I never stopped studying. I kept going because the theology bug had bit me by then, and I couldn't really stop. And after a few years of ministry and studying, I finished completed my studies here at Acadia, and was presented the opportunity to study in the UK, and so we went. Sold everything, and off we went on this adventure where I did my PhD in Wales, and then landed a job in London and taught for 12 years in the London School of Theology. Peter pastored in England and in Wales, and we were there for 15 years in total. And lo and behold, I got a phone call, and Harry Gardner said, "Why don't you come back to Acadia?" And that was about 8 years ago, and here I am.
That was one good thing I did.
Oh, of many, Harry. Of many.
Well, we're glad to have you back. And while you were in the UK, just in terms of just context, because I think it's always good for people who are listening in to kind of get a sense of who this is. You're a mom, not only a wife, you're a mom. And your son David was born while you were in the UK. And here he is now 12.
That's right. We were old parents because we were married 20 years before he came along.
Wow.
Yes,
that's
indeed.
Wonderful.
Wow. And I was acting principal of the college where I was that year, and all the things that are supposed to be in place for it not to happen. Old, married that long given up, and surprise, he came along.
What a gift he is.
Yes, wonderful.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for that. And in terms of just, again, because some of our folks listening will not understand anything about Acadia Divinity College, tell us a little bit about the college.
Sure. Acadia Divinity College is the seminary of the Canadian Baptists of Atlantic Canada, has been since its founding. They're the body who own us, nurture us. We're their seminary. But we also train people from all kinds of denominations. We're a broadly, warmly evangelical seminary. We welcome people from all kinds of different Christian faith families, and they do train here at different levels, anywhere from certificate through to doctoral level, doctor of ministry level.
And scattered across the world, actually.
All around the world. In fact, we had a call together today with some people involved with the college, and they came from British Columbia, and they came from Bolivia, and they came from everywhere in between. So yeah,
Right.
we're a wide family these days.
We are a wide family. As I mentioned earlier, the Aaron Ministries Network, part of what I'm excited about in terms of my role with them is that it's a peer relationship of encouraging healthy leaders in healthy congregations. And I know that the impact of those churches, providing leaders that will impact communities, I know that's very much part of your heart and at the college. And how do you see that fitting in, or at least I know that it's a question that I think I'd like to hear your opinion on that, but from my perspective, I think it's a great fit. But tell us about how you see those goals fitting in with the college.
Well, sure. I mean, there's a great resonance. Our whole mission, our whole raison d'etre here as a school is to equip people for Christian service, to serve the mission of God locally and around the world. So equipping people for whatever the service God is calling them to is the whole reason we're here.
Right.
And we're able to do that in a context that is on and part of a wider university campus, which gives us a really unique context for training people, for equipping people, and not only preparing people in advance of their ministry, but in the context of ministry, and then after experience of ministry as well. So it's really, I mean, I think we've come to realize that theological education is not a one and done. It's a lifetime journey where at different stages of that journey we need to be equipped in different ways. And the Divinity College is really about equipping ministers and ministry leaders for that whole life journey, and not just kind of well, when you're young, come and do this and then you're done. It's a whole life thing.
And we know that many of the folks who come will serve in local churches, but we also know that there are a variety of ministries in terms of, I'm thinking of chaplaincies and the impact of people trained for military, hospital, various kinds of chaplaincies as well, prison ministries.
Yeah, I can't help but think about in a year like this, it really hit home to me the impact that theological education is having, you know, in times when perhaps life seems a bit difficult or trying and things happen and you think, you know, where is God and where is the light in our communities? And we found that it's in the lives of our graduates who are out in the field, in communities where really difficult things are happening. They're there bringing light and hope. In the nursing homes, which some of them, as we know, one in particular in Nova Scotia, really ravaged by COVID. Graduate there who's a chaplain who was holding the hands of the people as they passed and giving them a sense of hope and hope to the families as well. People who are chaplains in the military in difficult situations, in prisons and correctional facilities, and everywhere where it seems there is what we would sometimes think of as a dark place. Our graduates are there as leaders bringing light and bringing hope into the midst of it, which is really why we do what we do.
And this is why we do, what we might call during usual times, but this is a very unusual time. And I know that in terms of the many hats that you have, in terms of responsibilities, one of them is a key role here as the director for the Andrew D. McRae Center for Christian Faith and Culture. Andrew was a primary figure, by the way, in the early days of the Aaron Ministries Network. I know that it's not as if the center's over there and what you do is somewhere over here. I know it's all integrated, but how does your passion for the practical application of theology and the need for leaders to be what we might call good theologians, how does that fit, that work of the center? I mean, how does that fit particularly during these times as well?
I think that, you know, being a center for Christian faith and culture, it really emphasizes the fact that as Christians and as Christian leaders, we sit not in the church sealed off from the world, nor in the world as if there's no contact with the church. And these times, more than ever before, we realize that the walls of the church need to be transparent if they need to be there at all. And we're talking about the body of Christ coming out into the world incarnationally in ways that we haven't been forced to think about for a long time. And so the mission of the McRae Center from its inception till now is really about equipping Christians to understand that relationship between faith and culture so that we can bear witness to the good news of Christ no matter how culture shifts and changes. And I think that sometimes, unless we're willing to do some of the difficult thinking sometimes, we settle for easy answers to questions, and they don't satisfy the questions that are being asked by people outside of a faith context. And I'm one who believes that Christ goes everywhere before us. And so, if he's prepared that way, then we can confidently step into it. We don't have to be afraid. We don't have to feel threatened. There's nowhere we can't go and bear the light of Christ. But sometimes it will take some understanding so that we don't trample on new green shoots that are just coming out of the ground, or that we don't snuff out a smoldering wick that is ready to burst into flame, because we can do that sometimes if we bring our own agendas and bear too heavily on where people are. But learning to listen, learning to interpret, learning to understand, and yet to respond with the love and hope of Christ.
So in the educational process for a student here, everything's wide open, opportunity to think about, talk about, work through all kinds of issues.
Well, there's the thinking and the doing parts, of course, and the being. And so the thinking parts are really important, to learn to understand Scripture better so that we represent Scripture well in the context in which we minister, so that we understand theology. People say, well, what's the use of theology anyway? It's because if we don't know how to think well about our faith, we'll make it up as we go. And we see an awful lot of that in the world today, making it up as we go, rather than understanding the historical roots that are true and real and that build us up into who we are today with a great confidence, not an arrogance, because there's still a sense, I think, that when we learn to think well about the things of God, we come with a humility as well, and recognize that there's always going to be more that we don't get, and yet to be confident in what we have been given. And not to overstep that. So there is that thinking piece, and then there's the doing piece. There's that if you're thinking well, you're being formed to do well, and so to minister with competence, to be able to meet people exactly where they are without visiting your own stuff on them, and so on. And then, of course, that being piece is just knowing who you are in Christ and ministering out of that self-knowledge. That's hugely important.
Anna, you worked this out practically on the campus as well, because there have been a number of, I think they were called debates, but they're dialogical opportunities for people to visit together. You have done that. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those?
Sure. I mean, the McRae Center has sponsored a number of events of different kinds. They tend to be gatherings where we talk about something. So one day we booked the theater in town, and we had a politics evening about do faith and politics go together. I think that if we, as Christians, just talk amongst ourselves, we reinforce our perceptions, which isn't always helpful. So I really like to invite people from different perspectives to come and talk. And it's not just so that we can hear other perspectives. It's because if we never learn to talk together, we never learn how to share faith in a context that might be otherwise unfamiliar to us. So part of it is just the fun of discussion and debate, and part of it is a demonstration of how we share faith in diverse ways.
So there's been some interaction with the philosophy department and some with the
politics,
science. It's been great.
And we've had a number of debates with a member of the philosophy department. We've had 3 over the last few years.
Where
we take an aspect of what it's like to be a theist or an atheist and approach a topic from those perspectives. And it's been very rich and intriguing for a lot of people.
But such a great model for students to realize, too, that they're not just here in a brick building studying, and many times they're not literally here either because of the opportunity to study online. Tell us a little bit about just we're living through COVID as we speak, but how was Acadia Divinity College prepared for its educational process when this pandemic hit us?
We're really grateful both to God and to our supporters, because we were really well prepared for this moment beyond what we could ever have imagined. Probably better prepared than we could have if we had known it was coming. And so we we had already invested heavily in technology in the classrooms. We're first and foremost, very committed to in-person education, as you know. It's really important to us that we know our students and understand the context from which they come and which they're going to be ministering in and so on. But we had found it was necessary to widen access to theological education to people who couldn't just pick up and move to Wolfville.
Right.
So we had invested quite heavily in technology and the integration of people off-site with students in class, so that when we were forced to close things up here, it was a really easy switch for us. We would do that on a storm day anyway and just hold class all online. Right. So that was what we were able to do to finish out last year. We did a few even more upgrades. We were already very well equipped, but we did more upgrades. We did some, the faculty met with some pedagogical experts and availed ourselves of all of that, and then not only switched to online teaching, but changed our whole pedagogy in the way that we present our material to assist online learning. Right. And that's been mostly productive so far. Right. I think we're told by our students who are from across Canada that we're very far ahead of other schools in Canada in terms of really grasping what needs to happen. And you know, we love our campus. We love being part of it. You talked about it before. You know, it's not about the debate. It's about witnessing to the goodness of God everywhere. And God is here on this campus. It's not just at home in the building, but it's this time has also enabled us to contribute, I would say, to the wider educational ministry of the university as well.
I know you've had a great passion for the church. What would you say? You're the president of the college. I know that a lot of pastors of various denominations, they're looking to you. You're a theologian. A lot of people asking a lot of questions these days. What do you think with respect to the church, what do you think are some of the changes that need to happen for the church to continue to be effective? Because, I mean, it's been tough for a lot of churches. Yeah.
Well, we know that the things that have been thrust upon us in terms of the changes were just simply accelerated. They were already happening, and they were accelerated by the conditions of pandemic. So if we think that this was again, you know, this is all new with the pandemic and it'll all pass, it's not going to. The things that we're experiencing and encountering were already in the ether, as it were. We're already working out. And so they've just been accelerated, whether that's decline or, you know, a sense of the worthlessness of buildings, for example. Some of those things that people are struggling with. And so I think we can look at that and take it as a negative and say, isn't this terrible? Everything is changing. Let's just hunker down until it passes. Or we can say, wow, what an opportunity to turn our churches inside out and to find new ways of doing things, not just to survive the pandemic, but because this is the way we reach people going forward. Right? This is the way we are effective as communities of faith in our wider communities.
I remember you and I talked different times about, you know, people were very saddened when Canada was no longer known as a Christian country, and there was just this sense of loss and all that. And you often said, well, this is a great opportunity for the church to be the church and for different models. Do you have any ideas about what some of those models could look like?
Well, I think a lot of it will be contextually determined, and so it will look different in different places for sure. I think we have to get away from the idea that, you know, here's a package or here's a model and this is good for everybody. Again, we saw that coming, but I don't know how well we embraced it. It means that I think that rather than think, look what happened in the pandemic, Harry. What's the first thing everybody did? How are we going to have our service online? Why did we turn to that as the main thing that we do? Another, you know, let's set it up, let's gather everybody in. Why was that the first thing? And yes, worship of God, the gathering for worship is hugely important, but so much that is about shoring up who we are rather than looking at the mission. And so I think what this presents for us is this marvelous opportunity as for our churches to say, what are we really here for? Is it to perpetuate the service? So that we can get the offering, so we can perpetuate the service? Or is this an opportunity to say, wow, at this moment in our country, God has placed the church here. He's placed us here as the leaders of the church. It's up to us. What are we here to do? And if ever there was a time to take a risk, to try something different, to to just bring the congregation to say, who are we and what are we here for, really? It's a marvelous opportunity.
And we know in the history of the church, there were times when the church got very involved during times of crises and plague and all the rest of it. They didn't just hunker down. They were very involved and engaged. I see you're passionate about that.
A little bit.
Tell me a little bit in terms of what do you think are some of I mean, we've talked a little bit about some of the challenges for the church, but what do you think are some of the bigger challenges for the church, even post-pandemic?
Well, the things that we're experiencing now, they're not going to pass. And so we have to think about the changes that are being made now, how we incorporate them for the long term. And so if we feel that, getting out of the building and finding creative ministries is important now, then we have to be thinking, and how are we going to keep that going once the buildings are open again? So we don't just revert to form. Right. I think that's hugely important to think, what are we doing now that we would like to continue? And if we're doing it now and we don't want it to continue, why are we doing it now? Right? So I really think that's a big piece of what we're doing. And if we're sitting there and saying, well, it's all going to pass, and then things will be back as they were, then I think we're then showing that we're much more interested in perpetuating our own version of structures rather than saying to the Spirit of God, where are you leading us now? Because that's a great adventure. It's scary, but if it's God's adventure, I'm not sure why we wouldn't want to be on it.
At the bedrock of all the conversation, I know, is your own personal confidence in Jesus in terms of his presence, his power. How on earth can we instill that kind of confidence in people in terms of him and what he's doing? I mean, you've had experience in the UK, you've had experience in Europe, different parts of the world. You're a person who is confident that Christ is building his church. How do we help to instill that, do you think?
Well, I think a good theological education is a big part of that, isn't it? I mean, really, because you have to understand that the scriptures are reliable, historically. I mean, and you have to understand that there are different ways of looking theologically at things that creates not only the humility, but the sense of the greatness of God, that he's bigger than the way you might see things. And yet the way you see things is completely legitimate. So there's a sense of contentment in your faith when you realize that. And so, expecting someone else to guarantee my faith or the conditions by which my faith can flourish, I think is the mistake of Christendom. When we learn that Jesus Christ is real and alive and the Holy Spirit is in me, as well as in you and those others who claim belief and the rest, then we can have every confidence, not in ourselves, not in a government, not even in a church, but in Jesus himself. And so when he gathers us together, then there's, we're not looking to take over a country. We're looking to engage the mission of God. And we can do that no matter what the conditions are around us. So I think letting go of the idea that somebody else has to guarantee the conditions of the church is very freeing. And that's really who we are historically as Baptists anyway. We're about local groups of believers, and not only Baptists, I would say many evangelical groups are like that and so on. But I don't think we can look to governments to guarantee our position in society and so on. What we should be asking for, though, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, we should be seeking freedom of religion, though, because if we're going to live and flourish in a pluralist society, and I think we should and can very well, it has to be free for everyone. So I think that is one that is a key.
That's helpful. Just had a couple more questions for you. One is a couple of things that we could be praying for you for in terms of just these days and in your own leadership.
Well, at this juncture as a school, we're leading into the next phase of strategic priorities. And so I'm tasked with the very exciting responsibility to imagine and this is the prophetic exercise, which I enjoy, but to imagine what culture, church will look like 5 years from now, and what we as a school, a theological educational institution, will need to look like 5 years from now. How will we need to be equipping students? And we're already thinking about that now, but when we're doing planning, we got to look out that space 5 years out. And so I pray for and would seek prayer for prophetic insight, really, in that exercise, so that the priorities we're committed to are the right ones, not for us as an institution, but for nurturing the life of the church and its leaders, which is what we're about. So that's probably the most important thing. And prayer for our students, I would say, because this is a change for a lot of them. For many, it's not a change. And so we're going to have wisdom about how we manage that piece, because some love this online learning environment and some struggle more with it. And so how we hold that piece together will be interesting. But prayer for our students as they prepare for and are equipped for the leadership that God has called them to as well. And for me as a leader, that I will be have the energy, like everybody else, church or institution, we need the energy, we need the insight, we need the patience and all of those things that anybody needs, but that I'm sure Christ is able to provide. And I depend on the prayers of his people for sure.
Thank you. One last question. Think about with me about the pastors and leaders who are listening to you right now. And the opportunity to speak into their lives, because many of them are contacting you, I know that, through email and other means. You're not just here as a president of a college, but you have a direct impact with the churches. What would be a good word of encouragement or a prophetic word that you'd offer to pastors and Christian leaders in these days?
I would say, don't be afraid of the risk. Take the risk. If it doesn't work, that's okay. But always take the risk, because unless you take the risk, you don't know. And we'll just repeat the old patterns. And I think that's a word for maybe those who have been in service a long time, and they can see that there's an opportunity for a risk, but it's a big risk when you've been in service for a long time. And for younger ones who are working with youth and so on, who want to take the risk, but they're not sure if they should. I just think, take the risk, and if it doesn't work out, there'll be another risk that you can take.
Great. Thanks, Anna, very much for the opportunity to visit with you today. And I know you have taken a risk in terms of stepping into leadership roles and the commendation of the church broadly and of the board of the college and so on. But we're really thankful that you've been willing to step into those places that God has called you. And we will assure you of our prayers.
Thanks so much. Great to chat with everyone.
Thank you.
Great.